Thanks for tuning in for another episode of our series of CIRP's mental health webinars. Enjoy and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
Hi everyone, really glad you could join us today. My name's Vicky Waldron. I'm the Executive Director of Construction Industry Rehab Plan. For those of you who aren't familiar with the plan, it's a mental health and substance use service that we offer to all members of the unionised construction sector. Not only do we offer it for yourselves, we also offer it for your family members as well. Really glad you came to checked in today, that you came in to watch. One of the things I'll say is that these sessions always are so much better when we have interaction from the audience. So as I'm going through the presentation today, please do ask a question. If it's not a question, just even comments. It really does mean that we can kind of tailor things for you more specifically. Anyway, so today we're talking about aggressive versus assertive communication. So we'll start with a couple of definitions. Assertive behavior is the type of behavior or communication that allows a person to act in his or her own best interest. It's where you're able to stand up for yourself without a lot of undue anxiety. You're able to express your feelings comfortably, and you're able to exercise your own rights without denying the rights of others. And that's the key thing. It's being able to speak up and talk about what's important to you without denying the rights of others. And that's really key when we talk about assertive behavior. Then we kind of talk about aggressive behavior or aggressive communication. Aggressive behaviors and communications, they're those communications that are forceful, hostile, or attacking. They occur without, or they might occur in retaliation without provocation. In psychology and other social behavioral sciences, we would refer to aggression as something that involves intent to cause harm, even if it's only a mean to an end. So, for example, I'm going to be quite strict and quite aggressive to this person because it actually makes them do this, and which is better for everybody. So that might be the kind of reasoning that you might hear around that. Still doesn't make it okay. So, question. Why should you care? Right? Why are we here talking about aggressive versus assertive communications? Well, it boosts, when people are able to assert themselves and have communication that is assertive, it actually boosts self-esteem. So self-esteem is super important, certainly in my field when we're talking about psychology and people's mental health and well-being. Self-esteem is about the extent to which we actually feel positive or negative about ourselves. So it's super important. It also reflects an individual's subjective evaluation about their own sense of worth. So it's about how you feel about yourself and how valuable you think yourself, think that you are as a person. It's also high self-esteem is linked to really good, positive physical health as well. People that have high self-esteem, we know that those folk, when that self-esteem helps to buffer the impacts of negative physical health. So things like stress. So when someone has high self-esteem, the physical impacts that someone would normally experience because of stress are actually buffered when we have high self-esteem. It helps to reduce stress. It reduces the amount of anger people feel, and it also increases respect from other people. The fact that it reduces anger is really important. When we know that when people experience anger, I think generally most people understand that anger actually causes a lot of physical impacts onto physical impacts on our health. We know that if somebody has an angry outburst, for example, that 2 hours after you've had that angry outburst, you actually double your risk for a heart attack. I'm not sure if many people knew that, but that's actually been shown in research. It also increases your risk for a stroke. It reduces your immune system as well. It weakens your immune system when when people have these angry outbursts. So talking assertively can be a way to avoid those things. So when we talk about communication styles, what we're actually talking about is 4 particular communication styles. So we're talking about the passive communicator, the passive aggressive communicator, the aggressive communicator, and the assertive communicator. So a passive communicator, that's really somebody that is really, usually in a workplace, passive communicators are very easy to get along with. Most people really like passive communicators, and the reason for that is that they don't say anything, they don't object to anything. So generally, people in the workforce, people in authority, they quite like passive communicators because they get very little resistance from them. They're easy to get along with, they don't often say no. The downside to this is, while other people might find them very easy to get along with, for the person themselves, the person who is the passive communicator, what we'll often hear is they often feel like their feelings aren't being considered, or that they're not taken seriously within the workplace, or that they're not valuable in the workplace. And that's something that that can have quite a significant impact on people. They can often fail to express their feelings. They're often people that are in the center of misunderstandings at work. So people that are passive communicators, you'll often find that there's a lot of confusion around those communicators, that people often misunderstand their meaning or what they're trying to do. They will often say things like it doesn't really matter that much. So if they have an opinion, they might start it with, well, it doesn't really matter, but, or I just wanted to keep the peace, only if you don't mind, or I'm not that bothered. So you'll hear lots of these kind of sentences come out of the mouths of people that are passive communicators. They're more interested in keeping the peace. Then they don't want to cause ripples. They don't want to cause bumps in the road. So they just want people to get along. You often hear that. So then you have the passive aggressive communicator. And I think I was saying yesterday to somebody that if you've gone through life, there's always somebody that we all know somebody that is a passive aggressive communicator. And I'll hold my hand up. I know that at some point in my life, at some point, I have been that passive aggressive. We've all done it at some point. It's the type of communication where on the surface, you look like you're really agreeing and you're getting along with people on the surface, but actually underneath, you're really not agreeing with people, you're really not getting along with people, but what you're doing is communicating that in a very indirect, subtle way. Passive communicators tend to act out a lot. So passive communicators are the type of situations you'll see them in, or the type of communications you'll hear is things like, sure, I'll do that. Yeah, I can do that if they're asked to do something. But actually what will happen is they just don't do it. So that's a very subtle but passive aggressive way to deal with something that they didn't want to deal with. But rather than say, hey, I don't want to deal with this, they'll say, yeah, I'll do that, and then just not do it. People that are passive aggressive will often feel powerless. They'll feel like they have difficulty acknowledging their anger. They might be very angry about something, but they're not likely to say it, that they're angry. They will often have, from my perspective, in psychology, they will often have what we call incongruent facial expressions to their emotions. So a passive aggressive communicator may actually be quite annoyed by something that's being discussed, but on the surface they won't show that. They'll be smiling away, but inside they'll be seething, absolutely seething about it. They might passive aggressive communicators, and we often see this in relationships, and we'll see this in relationship marriages, partnerships, where you have one partner that is passive aggressive in that they won't be screaming and shouting with their partner, but they'll give them the silent treatment. So they'll be, just not talk to somebody for days, maybe weeks on end. So that's an example of passive aggressive communication.
So Vicky, if I could just interrupt here, we've had a question about passive aggressive communication. Are there any suggestions you have for project work with a passive aggressive teammate when results matter?
Yes. Okay, so what I'm hearing there is that the teammate is passive aggressive.
Yeah, I think
okay.
So.
So I think that the thing to, if you're not the passive aggressive, I think that's a great question. Actually, the thing you can do is actually ask and actually ask that person. So, what do you think about what we're talking about? How do you feel about the project that we're going to be working on? Do you think that this is a valuable thing to be doing? Do you think that this project will work in this way? And it's really to elicit that information, because the chances are that person has some opinions on this. They feel some type of way about this, and they have some thoughts, but they're just not able to tell you that. So sometimes they actually need permission to come forward, or you might even, paperwork is a great way to do it, where you can request feedback. Now, the thing with that is it's not always a quick thing. Sometimes you need something there in the minute. And so one of the things you can do is just ask and just say, so what do you think about this? I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on what's going on. And that's, because what you do when you say that is you're not promising that something will change. You're not promising that you're going to alter the way that you do something, but what you are saying is, I'm interested in hearing what your thoughts are on this. And that's always a good sentence. I think that one single sentence is probably going to be quite useful, where you, when you finish communicating, that you follow it up with by saying, I'm really interested in hearing what your thoughts are on what I've just said. And that way you're not setting someone up because you haven't promised anything that you can't deliver on.
Great, that's great. Thank you.
So passive aggressive communicators, they can also appear cooperative, but actually they're like I said, they're doing the opposite thing. So the type of sentences you'll hear from people that are passive aggressive, and you hear this a lot, is that's fine with, like, if you ask somebody to do something and they don't agree with it, what they're more likely to say something along the lines of, that's fine with me, but don't be surprised if somebody else gets mad. Sure, we can do things your way, but it's stupid, and they'll mutter under their breath, those kind of things. So that's really a good way to kind of identify someone that might be passive aggressive. Then, of course, we've got aggressive communicators. Aggressive communicators, I think, are very easy to spot, and I think most of us are probably able to recognize an aggressive communicator. So you will hear them, you can't miss them, you'll see them, you may even feel them, depending on how they communicate. They'll be very loud in their expressions. They'll be very loud in their voice and their speech. They'll have a very demanding type of voice. They often are criticizing people as well. So it's, why can't you do this? And I asked you to do this 5 minutes ago. Why is it not done? Those kind of things. That's very much an aggressive communication style. They tend to be of an opinion that they're right and everybody else is wrong. And it's often, I'm going to get it done my way, no matter what. That's often the type of attitude you hear. One of the things that I always say to people is, when you are going through, you're communicating with someone, and you might now, as a result of this presentation, perhaps you might be wondering, how do I know if this is actually aggressive, or how do I know if I'm being passive aggressive or even passive? Like, how do I figure this out? One of the tips that I always give any of our clients on the program is, ask yourself, am I okay, and is the other person okay? So what you're asking is, I'm okay, you're okay. If you can say yes to both of those things, then you're probably having a very good, healthy conversation, or a good assertive communication is going on. If you ask yourself that and say, am I okay? And you say no, is the other person okay? Yeah, they appear to be okay. It might be that they are either aggressive, or that you are actually passive, and that they're not aggressive, but you're just passive. So the question is really, I'm okay, you're okay. Am I okay? Are you okay? If you can answer yes to both of those, you've probably got the tone of the communication just right. So assertive communication, and this is what we really want everybody to be engaging in. This is the most effective form of communication. As I said, there's actually physical benefits to assertive communications. It's the most effective, it's not overbearing. People are able to express their needs, their desires, their feelings, and at the same time as doing this, they're considering the needs of other people. People that are assertive communications are actually looking to have both sides of the conversation to come out winning, basically. So they want the person that's communicating to still be winning, and they want themselves to be winning in that conversation. So it's really looking for both people to be satisfied. And one of the key things about assertive communications, and it's probably the strongest tool that we have in our toolbox as clinicians, is using I statements. I was saying yesterday, and I say this all the time, somebody that if you are talking about yourself, i.e. using I statements, it's very difficult for another person to get irritated and annoyed. They're more likely to get angry if you are talking about yous. If you are using the word you a lot, people are very likely to get upset and annoyed. It's a bit of a skill. It's not one of those great big kind of revelationary things that I'm saying. However, when you stop and think about how often we use the word you in a sentence, you might be quite shocked at how often you do this. Certainly before coming into this role or this industry many years ago, I had to train myself to not use the word you and to really focus on I. And as clinicians, we're trained to do that because we know that when we stick to I statements, you don't upset other people. The chances of upsetting another person drop significantly. So, for example, rather than saying you're really upsetting me, or that you are really winding me up, or you are really peeing me off, what you could say is, I'm feeling really frustrated by our conversation. And so when you say something like that, you haven't blamed anything on another person. They might be contributing to the frustration, but you haven't actually gone out and said, it's you. You're pissing me off. You're frustrating me. You're making me angry. What you've actually said is, I feel frustrated by our conversation. And people are less likely to erupt. They're less likely to be responsive in an angry way. One of the other things I always say is, I say to our clients, or my clients when I'm in my practice, I'll say, imagine, when you go to a sporting event and you get those big foam fingers. Imagine you've got that on your hand, and every time you say you know, imagine that pointing to the other person. It's huge. And so I always say, every time, you are making me angry, or you are frustrating me, I don't like the way you are speaking, and it's like doing this, and nobody wants that finger jabbing. So sticking to I statements is very useful, and the benefits of doing that, even though it takes a bit of practice, when you start practicing it, you'll find that all of your communications, suddenly they're so much easier, and you'll be kind of going, really? I can't believe how much calmer they are. So what you're really telling people is that we each of us, I don't have to agree with what you say, I don't have to like what you say, but I can respect what you have to say. It's recognizing that everybody has a choice to feel a certain way. So looking at some examples of passive versus assertive and aggressive communications. And so people that are passive, they're usually afraid to speak up. They'll speak softly. They may avoid looking at people, shows little expression, slouches and withdraws, isolates self from groups, values themselves less than other people. That's often the case in passive communicators. And also, you're okay to have your own feelings be hurt rather than hurt other people's feelings. So there's really no value placed on your own feelings and opinions. Aggressive communicators, on the other side, will interrupt and talk over people. They'll speak loudly. They'll often glare and stare at people. You've seen that one person that gives you the eye, or the evil eye, or the side eye, and that's really quite aggressive. Stands with crossed arms. Only really is worried about their own feelings, and values what they have to say much more than anything anybody else would have to say. And they're happier rather to have your feelings be hurt at the expense of having their own feelings hurt. So they'll do everything to make sure that their own feelings aren't hurt. And then, of course, you've got the assertive communicator. And this is where you really want to sit. You want to sit somewhere in the middle of passive and aggressive. And really what you're doing there is you're speaking openly. You're going to use more of a conversational tone. You're not going to raise your voice. It's more even toned. You have good eye contact. You're going to participate in the conversation. And you speak to the point of discussion. And this is one of the key things. And this is what separates out aggressive from assertive. And what we mean by that is, again, so you want to talk to the thing that you are talking to, not to people. So rather than saying you broke this, or you don't know how to run this, or your procedure is rubbish, what you actually want to say is, this procedure isn't working and here's why, or this is broken and this is how we can fix it. This is not working, and I have some ideas on how we can make this work. So you can see there that what you're actually doing is talking to the point of discussion and not actually using that foam finger to say, you broke this, your idea sucks. And that's when communication starts to get really difficult, and that's when it can turn quite aggressive. So what we're actually saying there in a nutshell is that passive communicators don't really reach their goals, and they may not know their goals. Assertive communicators reach their goals, but they do it without alienating other people, and that's what we really want. That's where we want to land. So moving on to strategies, and I think this is really key. So strategies for assertive communications, you really want to identify your current communication style. You want to use I statements. Sorry, coming back to identifying your communication style. So how do you figure out what communication style you have? Ask yourself, do you voice your opinions, or do you tend to stay silent? Are you quick to say yes, even when your plate is full? Like, how many of us have done that, where, you know, we've got so much on our plate, but we still say yes? Are you quick to judge or blame, right? Are you silently judging other people? Are you blaming other people for things that are going wrong? Are you afraid to talk about something? You know, in your mind, you're frustrated and you're seething that something isn't working, but you're afraid to talk about it. Do you compromise more often than you would like to? If so, then the chances are that you are maybe you're passive, or maybe you're passive aggressive in your communication styles. And again, ask yourself, I'm okay, you're okay. Ask yourself that question, am I okay, and is that other person okay? And if the answer is I'm usually not okay, then your style probably isn't assertive. Use I statements. You let people know how you're feeling without casting blame, and that is always going to be received so much better than the foam finger, right? Always think of that foam finger anytime you say you. When you are requested, if you tend to say, I need you to do this, that can very much be seen as aggressive communications. Although on the surface, that's something that may appear quite neutral, you know, that doesn't feel aggressive. I need you to do this. But when you are communicating to someone, if you're communicating to someone that's assertive in their communications, no problem. That's not going to there's not going to be a problem in that. However, when you say that to somebody that's passive, it can lead to problems. So I always suggest we change you need to do this to I would like you to help with this. It's a different way of communicating, and it takes out the word need, and it takes out the foam finger when we're talking to other people. So that's something that people can definitely try when we're looking at strategies for assertive communication. The other thing is to really practice saying no, and this is more for folk that are passive aggressive or passive communicators. Saying no isn't that easy, and it's sometimes you actually need to practice doing this. So find somebody who you feel safe with, a friend, and just practice saying no. Rehearse what you're going to say. That's the other thing I always say. Rehearse. If you know that there's a difficult conversation coming up, stay home, or not stay home, sorry, at home, rehearse in your mind, think about what you're going to say. The other thing I always say is do it in the mirror. Now, this might sound odd, but when you practice saying no, you want to be careful on what's going on here. You want to be careful on how your face is, what messages you're sending. So very calm, perhaps a smiley, but not too over the top smiley face, but a pleasant, you know, the way that you're looking at someone. You don't want to kind of be scrunched up and no, I don't want to do this, because that gives a much more, it's a different communication to if someone is saying, you know, I don't want to do this. A lot different. Body language, make sure that your body language is neutral when you are practicing to say no. The other thing that I would say is keep your emotions in check. When we are communicating, especially in the workplace, we want to keep our emotions in check and try very hard to talk about the issue at hand. Talk about the thing that you're talking about and try and keep emotions out of it, unless you're talking about your own emotions. If you go into a situation that's really emotional, take a few minutes to just think about this, take a breath before you go in and start that conversation. That's always recommended.
Vicky, we have a question from the audience.
Yep.
Do you know of any book or podcast suggestions to get better at communication?
Do you know, I do, and I cannot for the life of me think of the chap I'm thinking of right now. So what I'll do, I'm so sorry, I should have had this ready. But there's lots of books around how to, I can't think of the chap I'm thinking of particularly, I can't think of his name right now, but if you do Google, you'll find lots of information around assertive aggressive communication. There's tons of YouTube videos that you can look up. There's definitely books around this as well. It's a subject that's quite well researched. So yeah, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the guy that I was actually thinking of when I was thinking of this, so I do apologise. But maybe we can look at that and get that put up. But I do know that there's tons of books that you can look up, or podcasts that are available around this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe if you remember the name, we can always post it on the Facebook group. Or
sorry.
No worries.
So one of the tips for behaving less aggressively, and I'm conscious of time, so I'll go through this quite quickly. So if you want to be more assertive and you think that you might be speaking aggressively to people or communicating, just really try to bring down some of that tone of what you're saying. Start to change the you sentences to I sentences. Make sure that you give other people a chance to speak. Sometimes you may not want to be aggressive and you're not even realizing that your communication is aggressive, or what somebody might call aggressive. So let others speak, and that's probably some of the hardest things for a lot of people to do. I can tell you that being East Indian, in our culture, we don't wait for people to talk, and I believe Italian friends have told me the same thing. We talk over each other, and it's a very, very normal thing to do, and it's culturally totally acceptable. So working in this profession, in my practice, one of the most difficult things that I had to learn was learning to just stop speaking and letting other people finish their sentences, and not talking over other people. And that's not an easy skill, but if you can learn to do that, it goes a long way. I think the other thing, sorry, just running past this too quick. The other thing is to learn to respect other people's opinions. You don't have to like it. You don't even have to like the person, but you can, if you can learn to respect that they have an opinion, then I think that goes an awful long way. Always remembering to be diplomatic. So rather than an example of how you can be diplomatic is rather than telling someone that they're wrong, you might say, rather than saying you're wrong, you might say I disagree. Right? That's a much softer way of saying something. It's basically you're cushioning the way that you're communicating to another person. You're being more diplomatic. Avoid exaggerating. That's always quite common. So if someone is late and you say something like, you're always late, you might want to stop and think, are they always late or are they frequently late? That doesn't mean they're always late. So again, changing some of those languages, the tone of the language and the way that you're speaking, changing some of those words can go a long way to change aggressive communication to assertive. And avoid physically aggressive behavior always, like never place hands on anybody, never slam doors, never shout, those kind of things. If you can, all of those would be tied in with aggressive communication. So in conclusion, remember, learning to be assertive takes time and practice. If you've spent years and years silencing yourself and not having a voice, it doesn't happen overnight. It's something you've got to practice. Or if you get angry very quickly, again, it doesn't happen overnight. But if you can implement some of these simple strategies, and we'd be happy to put our presentation up on the Facebook pages afterwards, it can go a long way, and it can really change some of the relationships you have at work with other people or in your personal relationships. Assertively aggressive communication is something that in my practice, it's one of the #1 things and strategies and tools that we work on in marriage counselling. So anytime I have couples come in, it's one of the first things that I start to talk about. And it really, the payoff is huge. People really find that just by changing, the way they feel never changes. They feel the same way, but the way that they express how they feel suddenly changes the way that they are communicating with people, and they find that they're less stressed overall.
If you liked our video and you want to see more like it, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel.